So one thing about Bob Iger is that we know that he is now in complete damage control mode as well as double down mode to really just try and attempt to fix this movie as much as possible, to lie to the audience.
Disney's latest live-action remake, Snow White 2025, has quickly become one of the most disastrous releases in the company's history. What was meant to be a fresh reimagining of a beloved classic has instead turned into a cautionary tale of bloated budgets, poor creative decisions, and failed attempts at modern storytelling.
And how Rachel Zegler disrespected the original and a classic from Walt Disney, something that completely saved Disney and changed the company and changed animation in general.
Now Disney finds itself in full damage control mode, with CEO Bob Iger and the studio's leadership scrambling to salvage what they can. Reports indicate the film went through at least 3 rounds of reshoots, always a bad sign for a major production. These last-minute changes result in a movie that feels disjointed, riddled with inconsistencies, and lacking any real heart.
And now as Disney desperately tried to do a PR spin job in the final months to make it look like Rachel Zegler is actually likable, it ultimately was a complete failure.
From the very beginning, Snow White 2025 was mired in controversy. The project was meant to be a fresh, modernized take on the beloved 1937 animated classic, but instead it became a lightning rod for criticism from both casual audiences and die-hard Disney fans.
Disney is reportedly scaling back on Snow White. This movie is in serious trouble. It's been in production hell forever, and y'all probably know about the controversies because they just keep popping up.
Much of the backlash stemmed from lead actress Rachel Zegler's public statements about the original film. In multiple interviews, she appeared to dismiss the 1937 version as outdated, irrelevant, and even problematic by today's standards. She described Prince Charming as a weird stalker, criticized Snow White's romantic storyline, and emphasized that the new version would be about female empowerment rather than traditional fairy tale romance. While modern reinterpretations of classic stories can certainly work, many fans felt that Zegler's comments were needlessly dismissive of the film that made Snow White an icon in the first place.
They could not make this movie work for the life of them, and now they're trying to bury it.
The backlash only grew when older interviews resurfaced showing Zegler openly mocking the original film's themes and legacy. Rather than framing the remake as a loving homage, her remarks suggested a fundamental rejection of the source material, alienating longtime Disney supporters who cherish the classic story. Social media quickly turned against her, with viral compilations of her interviews fueling the perception that she viewed the role in even Disney fans with a sense of disdain.
The corporate press, still woke as they are playing this game where they're like, a bunch of toxic people. That's what they're saying in Variety.
Adding to the controversy, early promotional material emphasized sweeping changes to the story, including the replacement of the 7 dwarves with a diverse group of magical beings referred to as the Bandits. This decision, meant to avoid stereotypes, was widely criticized as unnecessary and even condescending to the original film's legacy. The backlash reached new heights when set photos leaked, revealing that only one of the 7 characters was actually a little person, prompting accusations that Disney had sidelined actors with dwarfism.
There is another controversy, and this one's actually kind of funny, and that is most people have been complaining that the evil witch who is jealous of Snow White's beauty is substantially more attractive than Snow White.
Behind the scenes, the film's creative process was plagued by confusion and indecision. Director Mark Webb, best known for the Amazing Spider-Man films, was reportedly constrained by corporate mandates, struggling to find a balance between honoring the original and injecting modern themes. Producer Aaron Harberts, known for his work on Star Trek Discovery, also faced difficulties as executives constantly revised their vision for the film. Meanwhile, screenwriter Greta Gerwig, celebrated for her success with Barbie 2023, was brought in to help rework the script, but even her involvement couldn't resolve the film's inconsistent tone.
The 7 politically correct companions, this movie was never going to make it out.
Early internal screenings raised major red flags. Reports from test audiences pointed to glaring pacing issues, a lack of emotional depth, and characters who felt underdeveloped or unrelatable. Instead of tackling these fundamental storytelling flaws, Disney focused on controlling the film's narrative in the press. Executives downplayed concerns, insisting that the backlash was fueled by bad faith critics who refused to accept a modernized Snow White.
Here's a story from Variety. Disney scales back Snow White Hollywood premiere amid Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot controversies. Now, this is the lighter headline, because I could have gone with, why is Disney burying Snow White?
However, the audience response suggested otherwise. Fans weren't rejecting the idea of a fresh take. They were rejecting what seemed like a cynical, soulless reimagining that misunderstood what made the original special. Rather than embracing timeless storytelling principles, the film appeared to be built around a checklist of corporate-mandated updates designed to appeal to focus groups rather than genuine Disney fans.
Disney is hosting a Hollywood premiere of Snow White on March 15th, but the studio won't be rolling out a robust red carpet. That's right, the premiere is just, don't tell anybody, they have to do it.
As a result, the project quickly spiraled into a PR disaster, with negative buzz overshadowing any excitement for the film's release. Instead of course correcting, Disney doubled down on damage control, releasing vague reassurances, cutting controversial promotional clips, and ultimately scrambling to salvage a film that was already doomed by its own creative missteps.
Now, instead of casting a woman whose skin was white as snow to play Snow White, which is why she was called Snow White, they cast a Latina, a swarthy individual, meaning olive skin and darker hair, Rachel Zegler.
Behind the scenes, Snow White was plagued by constant rewrites, reshoots, and haphazard editing decisions, resulting in a final product riddled with inconsistencies. Sources suggest that major sequences were hastily rewritten and restructured on set, leading to glaring continuity errors that made it clear the film was assembled in a rush rather than carefully crafted.
And oh boy, is it bad. Not only do we have this video from Not the Bee, where they're scrolling through the website and all of the seats are basically available, nobody's seeing the movie.
Characters inexplicably appear in two places at once, as if the filmmakers lost track of where they were supposed to be within the story. Costumes change mid-scene without explanation, leaving audiences wondering if they had missed something. Even dialogue betrays the chaotic production. Characters reference events that were cut from the final film, leaving behind puzzling gaps in the narrative. These mistakes, while small in isolation, collectively create a disjointed viewing experience, making it painfully obvious that the movie had undergone multiple frantic overhauls.
From Daily Mail. Snow White and the empty cinemas. Embarrassing photos show deserted theaters with no bookings in prime time slots as Wokebuster becomes
The most egregious example of this rushed approach is the film's final act, which feels less like a carefully planned climax and more like a desperate attempt to cobble together whatever footage was available. Instead of a satisfying resolution, the ending feels abrupt and incomplete, an afterthought rather than the natural conclusion of Snow White's journey. The result is a finale that lacks emotional weight, leaving audiences feeling as if they've watched a film that never quite figured out what it wanted to say.
hilariously abysmal. So here you can see somebody filmed a video. We don't need any of that audio.
One of the most heavily criticized aspects of Snow White 2025 is how the story was rewritten to fit a more modern ideological framework, only for Disney to later backpedal when backlash mounted. The filmmakers initially leaned into a strong feminist reinterpretation of the story, but in a way that often came across as forced, condescending, or outright dismissive of the original film's themes.
Look at this one. So many people here to watch Snow White. To be fair, this clip right here actually was from a video where they show the screen and then show the audience is empty.
One now deleted scene reportedly featured Snow White delivering a monologue about rejecting patriarchal norms, openly mocking the idea of being saved by a prince. While modernizing classic tales is nothing new, the execution here felt heavy-handed, as though the film was lecturing rather than telling a compelling story. Another cut scene allegedly involved Snow White refusing to kiss the dwarfs on the forehead, sternly reminding them to respect her personal boundaries instead.
Here's Kangmin Lee saying, opening Friday night for Disney's Snow White in IMAX. Only one person bought a ticket. Dude, this is crazy.
These moments were initially positioned as central to the film's updated message, but as backlash against the remake grew, Disney scrambled to downplay them. Rather than standing by their creative choices, executives quietly removed the most controversial sequences in post-production, seemingly hoping that doing so would mitigate criticism. However, this last-minute backtracking only fueled further resentment. Audiences now felt they weren't just watching a misguided adaptation, but also a film whose creators lacked confidence in their own vision.
Snow White is the lowest performing Disney movie in decades. No one waited in line to see it. Are you kidding?
Ultimately, Snow White became a case study in what happens when a film is driven more by corporate mandates and social messaging than by a clear, cohesive narrative. Instead of crafting a compelling reinterpretation of a beloved classic, the filmmakers ended up with a disjointed, awkwardly edited mess, one that alienated both longtime Disney fans and general audiences alike.
To everyone who hates when I win, the winged victory came to the Louvre in pieces, and people still line up to see her.
Despite Disney's aggressive marketing campaign and repeated attempts to position Snow White 2025 as a groundbreaking reimagining of the beloved classic, the cold hard numbers tell a very different story. The film's opening weekend was a massive disappointment, falling drastically short of expectations. Domestically, it barely scraped past the $90 million mark, a disastrous figure for a high-profile Disney remake. International markets fared no better, with the film underperforming in key regions like Europe and Asia, where audiences showed little interest in this new take on Snow White.
And I can only hope that despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them,
given the film's massive estimated budget of over $300 million, including production and marketing costs, it's quickly shaping up to be one of Disney's biggest financial failures in decades. Even factoring in potential streaming revenue down the line, the film's steep losses are undeniable, casting a shadow over Disney's ongoing strategy of live-action remakes.
that at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.
Oh, no! To be fair, she hopes. I feel so bad.
While Disney's PR team scrambled to spin the narrative, audiences were already making their voices heard across social media. Hashtags like Not My Snow White and Disney Disaster have been trending for months, fueled by widespread disappointment and outright rejection of the film's creative choices. Memes mocking the movie have spread like wildfire, with some even comparing it to past Disney flops like John Carter or The Lone Ranger.
That's so crazy, man. A multi-billion-dollar franchise. Wow. Down the gutter. Down the gutter because they wanted to get woke, and thus they've gone broke.
Viral videos have further exposed just how little enthusiasm the film has generated. Clips of near-empty theaters during opening weekend have circulated widely, with some moviegoers documenting entire showings where they were the only ones present. Meanwhile, footage of untouched Snow White merchandise collecting dust in stores has only reinforced the perception that the film has failed to connect with audiences.
And she did all of these press junkets where she was like, this is not 1937. She's not waiting for the prince. She's not dreaming of who she's going to marry. She's going to be the leader she knows she can be. Nobody wants to watch that.
Perhaps one of the most talked about criticisms, however, is the ironic casting decision that undermines the entire story's central conflict. Viewers have been quick to point out that Gal Gadot's evil queen is noticeably more attractive than Snow White herself, creating an unintentionally comedic contradiction. Given that the plot hinges on the queen's jealousy of Snow White's beauty, many have found it difficult to take the story seriously, with some joking that the queen's magic mirror must have been broken.
Women don't want to watch that. Women want the prince. Sorry. I don't know why that's so offensive to feminists, that women want a good husband. What's wrong with that? Men want good wives.
All these factors, poor box office performance, brutal social media backlash, and widespread audience indifference have cemented Snow White 2025 as one of Disney's most embarrassing misfires in recent history. Instead of revitalizing a beloved classic, the film has become a cautionary tale about what happens when a studio prioritizes corporate mandates over genuine storytelling. Behind closed doors, tensions are boiling over, threatening to fracture the already strained relationships between key players in Disney's Snow White production. Rachel Zegler, the film's star, is reportedly furious about the removal of her most dramatic scenes, which she viewed as pivotal to her performance. Sources close to the actress claim she had poured immense effort into those moments, believing they would have better showcased her acting abilities and elevated her portrayal of the iconic character beyond the traditional fairy tale archetype. The decision to cut these scenes, insiders allege, was made without her input or prior knowledge, leaving Zegler feeling blindsided and undervalued. Compounding her frustration, she reportedly only learned about these changes through back channels. industry whispers, and unofficial sources, rather than through direct communication from Disney or the film's creative team. This lack of transparency has fueled speculation about a breakdown in trust between the actress and the studio, with some suggesting it could impact her willingness to collaborate with Disney on future projects. Meanwhile, Greta Gerwig, the acclaimed filmmaker whose influence on the project is undeniable, now finds herself at the center of a growing storm of scrutiny. Known for her distinct, character-driven storytelling and indie sensibilities, Gerwig was brought on board to reimagine Snow White with a modern feminist lens, a move that initially generated excitement among fans and critics alike. However, as the fallout from the film's disappointing performance continues to unfold, questions are being raised about whether her creative style is truly compatible with the demands of large-scale studio filmmaking. Industry insiders point to tensions between Gerwig's vision and Disney's more formulaic, family-friendly expectations, with some suggesting that the studio's heavy-handed editorial interventions may have diluted her original intent. Reports of clashing priorities during post-production, particularly over the balance between artistic innovation and commercial appeal, have only added fuel to the fire, with critics of the studio system arguing that Gerwig's talents were stifled by corporate oversight. For her part, Gerwig has remained publicly silent on the matter, but sources close to the director hint at her own frustrations with the process, raising doubts about whether she will return for future Disney projects. The commercial failure of Snow White has also sent shockwaves through Disney's extensive network of merchandising partners who had banked on the film being a surefire blockbuster to drive toy, apparel, and collectible sales. Leading up to the release, retailers had stocked shelves with an array of Snow White branded products, from dolls and costumes to themed home goods, expecting the kind of consumer frenzy that typically accompanies a Disney tentpole release. However, with the film underperforming at the box office and failing to capture the cultural zeitgeist, demand for these products has plummeted. Just days after the film's debut, major retailers were forced to slash prices in a desperate bid to clear inventory, with some reporting that items were being discounted by as much as 50%. This fire sale approach has not only eroded profit margins, but also damaged confidence in Disney's ability to deliver reliable, merchandise-friendly hits. Several companies are now reconsidering their future collaborations with the studio, wary of investing in projects that may not yield the expected returns. One executive from a prominent toy manufacturer, speaking anonymously, expressed frustration over the lack of a cohesive marketing strategy for Snow White, noting that the film's polarizing reception and lack of buzz left their products stranded on shelves. As Disney grapples with the fallout, the ripple effects of Snow White's failure are likely to influence the studio's approach to future live-action remakes, both in terms of creative direction and its partnerships with the merchandising industry. Internally, Disney executives are now reassessing their approach to legacy intellectual properties in the wake of Snow White's disappointing performance, a process that has sparked intense debate within the company's upper echelons. The film's failure has prompted a broader reckoning about the viability of Disney's current strategy for live-action remakes, which has leaned heavily on updating classic stories with contemporary themes and aesthetics. Sources within the studio reveal that several planned live-action remakes, including projects that were in early development or pre-production, have reportedly been put on hold indefinitely as executives reevaluate their creative and financial priorities. Among the projects rumored to be affected are adaptations of lesser-known animated classics and sequels to existing live-action remakes, though Disney has yet to make any official announcements. This pause reflects a growing concern that the studio may have overextended itself in its rush to capitalize on its vast catalog of beloved IPs, potentially diluting the brand's magic in the process. The internal reassessment has also reignited a contentious debate about the direction of Disney's storytelling. A faction of executives and creatives is pushing for a return to more traditional, family-friendly narratives that emphasize the timeless, universal appeal of the original animated films. Proponents of this approach argue that recent attempts to modernize classic stories, often by infusing them with overt social messaging or deconstructing their fairy tale roots, have alienated core audiences, particularly families and longtime Disney fans. They point to Snow White's polarizing reception as evidence that the studio may have strayed too far from the formula that once defined its success, prioritizing progressive ideals over the escapist fantasy that audiences crave. However, this perspective is not without opposition. Another camp within Disney advocates for continued innovation, warning that clinging to outdated tropes risks making the studio appear out of touch in an era where cultural representation and inclusivity are increasingly demanded by younger, more diverse audiences. The tension between these two viewpoints has created a palpable sense of uncertainty, with some insiders describing the current atmosphere at Disney as a creative tug-of-war that could shape the studio's output for years to come. Adding to the complexity is the looming leadership transition at Disney, with CEO Bob Iger set to step down in 2026. Iger, who returned to the role in 2022 after the tumultuous tenure of his successor, Bob Chapek, has been tasked with steering the company through a period of unprecedented challenges, including streaming losses, theme park controversies, and now the faltering performance of its theatrical releases. While Iger has publicly emphasized the importance of creativity and quality over quantity, his impending departure has fueled speculation about the future direction of the company. Rumors of internal shakeups, including potential changes to the executive team before Iger's exit, have only heightened the sense of instability. Some industry analysts speculate that Disney's board may accelerate its search for a new CEO to ensure a smooth transition, while others suggest that Iger's successor will inherit a company at a crossroads, forced to make difficult decisions about its creative identity and business model. For now, Disney's next steps remain uncertain, with executives reportedly commissioning extensive market research and audience surveys to better understand the missteps of Snow White and chart a path forward. At the heart of Disney's challenge lies a delicate balancing act: how to integrate modern social messaging into its films without sacrificing the timeless storytelling that once defined its brand. The studio's recent efforts to update its classic tales, whether by emphasizing female empowerment, diversifying casts, or tackling contemporary issues, have been met with mixed results. While some projects, like the live-action The Little Mermaid, have found success despite backlash, others, such as Snow White, have struggled to resonate with audiences, caught in a crossfire of cultural debates and fan expectations. Critics of Disney's approach argue that the studio's reliance on corporate mandates, such as diversity quotas or ESG, environmental, social, and governance initiatives, has led to storytelling that feels forced or inauthentic, overshadowing the emotional depth and whimsy that made the original films enduring classics. The supporters, however, contend that Disney has a responsibility to evolve with the times, reflecting the values and diversity of its global audience, even if that evolution invites controversy. Snow White may ultimately go down as a cautionary tale in Disney's storied history, a case study in what happens when a studio loses sight of its audience, prioritizing corporate agendas over genuine creativity. The film's struggles highlight the risks of overcomplicating a simple, beloved story, as well as the dangers of underestimating the emotional connection that fans have to Disney's legacy. For many, the film's failure is not just a financial or critical disappointment, but a symbolic misstep, raising broader questions about the studio's ability to navigate an increasingly polarized cultural landscape. As Disney looks to the future, the lessons of Snow White will likely loom large, serving as both a warning and an opportunity to rediscover the magic that has long defined the House of Mouse. And whether the studio can strike the right balance between innovation and tradition remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: the stakes have never been higher. The original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, was a milestone in animation, setting the stage for Disney's rise as a storytelling powerhouse. In contrast, the 2025 remake is likely to be remembered as a textbook example of how not to handle a beloved classic. While some defend the film's attempt at a progressive update, its financial and critical reception suggests otherwise. Even Disney's most loyal fans seem to agree: a modernized Snow White could have worked, but not like this. In the coming months, all eyes will be on Disney's next moves. Will they acknowledge the mistakes of Snow White 2025 and shift their strategy, or will they continue down the same path, risking further damage to their brand? One thing is certain: the fallout from this disaster is far from over,